Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. For today's episode, I'm joined by author Carissa Broadbent. Carissa is a writer based in Rhode Island. According to Carissa, she has been concerning teachers and parents with mercilessly grim tales since she was 9 years old. Now she's the author of the War of Lost Hearts trilogy and the Crowns of Nyaxia series. The Serpent and the Wings of Night is the first book in the Crowns of Nyaxia series, and it was an instant New York Times and USA Today bestseller. The second book in the series, The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, will be out in hardback in the UK tomorrow. It debuted at number 3 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, and the series has taken social media by storm. Here to chat to me all about it, Carissa, welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
I'm super excited to have you on. You are actually the first fantasy author that I've had on. So this is very exciting. I absolutely leapt at the chance at reading a fantasy book because I'm very much a newbie to this genre. I'm going to ask you to start with what you are currently reading.
So I'm actually in between books right now. So I will also ask you for a recommendation afterwards. I just finished The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, Leigh Bardugo, is that fantasy? Historical fiction?
Yes. It's like very, I would say out of all of her books, it's like probably the most it felt like the most literary. So definitely like fantasy.
Okay. I think I got confused by the cover of that because it looks like it's like a historical sort of vibe, but I wasn't sure.
Yes. So. Oh, it's definitely historical. It takes place like during the Spanish Inquisition. It was very good. Like the writing and the prose are like really beautiful. It had a lovely ending that like gave me a lot of capital F feelings. So that's really all a book needs to win me over.
Love that. I've not read any of her work yet, so I think I need to get to it for sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a big name. See, that's a much better person to start with on the fantasy stuff than me. Like when you said that, I was like the first, I was like, oh shit. I mean, start off this way.
Well, I mean, you're the first one that I've had on the podcast. I have read Babel by Rebecca Kwang. I think she's R.F. Kwang for Babel. And I've read Fourth Wing. So I read like a couple of like the ones that I'd seen everywhere.
The big ones, yeah.
Yeah, and I saw in a charity shop Sarah J. Maas's first book of, I think it's A Court of Thorn and Roses or something. Gosh, I'm really bad. But yeah, I'm totally new to it all. So I really need to crack on with it.
It's actually a little refreshing to me to have someone be like, oh, like a Court of Thorns and Roses or something like that, because like in my world that's like the
of course
so
the big like,
yeah no, it's like I'm not saying that in like a negative or sarcastic way. Like it's just like it's lovely to see like people discovering the genre, you know. Like I had a close friend of mine call me up like not that long ago and be like, have you heard of this book Fourth Wing? And I'm like, yeah. Yes, I have.
But it's so funny because like romantasy is such a successful genre now. Like it's become huge in the publishing world, and the books are just completely flying off the shelves. They're huge on like Book Talk and social media. Why do you think that it appeals to so many different people?
Oh, okay. So remember I told you that I was going to be rambly? To listeners who might not have heard this part, I think this was before we started recording. I already warned Hannah that I am going to be rambly.
I love that.
Okay, I have like a theory for this, a big picture like publishing theory as to what happened here. Once upon a time, about 15 years ago, there was this very big, very successful subgenre called YA sci-fi fantasy. That was like, you know, the Twilights and the Hunger Games and the Divergent series and all of that, like big, huge boom, all of these authors getting all this money and all these huge books that everyone loved. And I think that a lot of readers around that time who were teenagers around that time really loved, like those books were not marketed as romance books, but almost all of them had very strong like romantic subplots happening. And like a lot of the fandom around those series were based around like the romance aspect of those books. And a lot of those readers, coincidentally, were women. And the YA SFF, I do it every time, SFF genre continued to be very, very big, moving up to like a few years ago, you know, when you had kind of like the Cruel Prince, like those kind of books coming out in like the early 2010s. Please don't, I guarantee I got those dates wrong, but you know, the general gist, right? Like a few years ago. But then we had kind of this weird thing happening to YA sci-fi fantasy, where a lot of the readers who were reading those books were in fact adult women. They were the same people who started reading the Hunger Games when they were 15 years old and continued to want to those kind of more character-driven, more female-driven fantasy stories that also coincidentally had a lot of romance in them, but they weren't finding that on adult sci-fi fantasy shelves. They were finding them on the YA shelves. And then we had this weird thing happening where a lot of YA was kind of essentially being written for adults because those were the people who were buying them. And then actual teenagers were like, there's nothing out there for them. And finally, publishing has started to catch on to like, okay, there's a way we can market to this audience of people and give them what they want. And indie publishing, I think, was kind of fulfilling that a little bit earlier, which is how I have started out as a self-published author. Anyway, that's a very long answer to your question, which is that I
love it.
I think that that's why it's happening right now. I think finally we have a name for a thing that has actually been very popular for a really long time. And it's just that there's now a snappy marketing term for it. And we're marketing to the right people with the right word, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. I didn't realize actually that you had been self-published first. So what was that journey like?
Oh yeah, I am a huge proponent of self-publishing. I am still more than 50% self-published, and I don't think that that will change anytime soon. It's worked out very well for me. It's been very kind to me. I think that in this genre, like a few years ago, as you know, the romantasy term has only just started to take off in like a mainstream way in traditional publishing very, very recently, like within the last couple of years, if that. But we were doing it very well in indie publishing for several years now. And I like the freedom that it gives me. I like, you know, financially, it's nothing to sneeze at. So there's that also. And it also allows you to operate at like a pace and with a flexibility that traditional publishing sometimes like just literally cannot do because of the size of the machine that they have to steer. And I think, you know, not to get too far into like the businesses of authorship and publishing right now, but things change a lot in this industry very quickly. So it's also pretty comforting to have a lot of eggs in a lot of different baskets that you can move around if you have to, you know?
Yeah. You must market yourself really well though, because you have such a huge following across all your social media platforms. I mean, how have you managed to build that up?
I get asked this question a lot, and I feel like
Sorry.
No, I don't mean it that way. I'm saying I don't think I have like a satisfying answer because I don't know. I mean, I did work in marketing before I was an author, but I marketed like cybersecurity software to large companies. So a very, very different world. Yeah, it was like really technical. Like I spent a lot of time writing like white papers about technology, you know. But in that time, my main takeaway from working in marketing is that like 90% of marketing does not work. So as an indie author, actually here, this is a better way of putting it. My main takeaway was that it's a whole lot easier to market something that people really genuinely want versus trying to market something that you're kind of like trying to pin somebody to a chair and like force them to listen to your marketing, you know, which in the cybersecurity industry during the boom of cybersecurity, that was very much what it felt like. You know? So what I always have tried to do, and I believe in this very strongly, is sounds cheesy, but try to create the best books I possibly can. And I do that in a very structured way. I try to, when I'm writing a book, I write a list of what in specific terms, like very specific things that I think that readers are going to love, capital L love, about this book. And I try to write a list of like, who is the person who is going to love this book? What else do they love? Why are they going to love it? And if, as I'm editing the book, I find it hard to fill out this list with very specific things like scenes, lines, characters, that to me is like a craft issue. You know, that's not like a marketing thing. That's a craft thing. So to me, I think that marketing in a perfect world is very closely intertwined with craft. And that's how I've tried to approach it. And that's also how I keep myself from wasting too much time on things that I feel like don't really matter all that much. I'm also a very disorganized person. So I have to just like, I have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, let's get on to the Crowns of Nyaxia series. I don't know if I'm saying that right still. I'm very self-conscious about it.
No, you're very,
But
you're
okay,
correct. You're
good.
correct.
But I told you that I am very new to this genre and I absolutely devoured this book. I read like 300 pages in a day and then the rest of it I was like trying to like ease it out so that I had some left over, but it was just kind of impossible. I wanted to know what was going to happen. I very much hoovered it up, and yeah, I'm excited to kind of explore this genre now. I think first we should start by you telling my listeners a little bit about this series. I think that's the best place to start.
Okay, so the Crowns of Nyaxia series as a whole is about a dark world of vampires and humans and gods and all that like fun stuff. It was basically like I was watching the Netflix animated series Castlevania, and I was like, this is the coolest shit in the world. I would like to do something that is this awesome. The Serpent and the Wings of Night is about a young human woman who was raised in this world of vampires. She's the adopted daughter of the vampire king, and she enters a tournament to the death against all of the most powerful vampire warriors across all the vampire kingdoms. And she has to make an alliance with a very dangerous rival of hers named Rain. And he's an enemy to her father's crown, and there's a lot of tension there, and also it's a tournament to the death, so there's kind of an implicit situation there. But he is indeed a very attractive man, and
Yeah, I sense that.
yeah, right. I love to describe the genre of romance in general as, but oh no, he's hot. Like, oh, I have this terrible boss, but oh no, he's hot. Like, oh, I'm like
what a
shame by my enemy. Oh no, he's hot. That's the whole genre right there.
I love that so much. Now, I was very kindly sent the first in the series by your publisher in the UK, and like I said, I completely devoured it. But what do I have to look forward to with the second book in the series? Because obviously I need to go and get hold of that now.
A lot of angst, like so much angst. The end of the first book ends on a very explosive note that changes a lot of things in the character dynamics. And there's a lot of fallout from that. We can call it an enemies to lovers to enemies kind of arc. So in the second book, there's a lot of angst. There's a lot of very big feelings. And there's also a lot of political intrigue and battles and dark magic, some kind of weird, dark, gross dark magic, which I know that I'm in this very like fluffy romantasy genre, but there will always be like so much gross stuff in my books. Thank you for bearing with me, readers. And yeah, and of course, smut. There will be smut also.
We love to see it. We love to see
it. We do.
There is obviously some incredible world building in your book, but I think it's a huge thing in fantasy genres in the sense that you have to have this world building in there. I imagine that's quite a challenging, I don't know if it is one of the most challenging things that you've got to do in terms of writing a fantasy novel, but what is that process like in terms of building these worlds?
So with the Crowns of Nyaxia series, my last series, the War of Lost Heart series, which right now, as of speaking, it is not as mainstream popular as the Crowns of Nyaxia series, but it was my first successful series, like that allowed me to be a full-time author and everything. So that is also a romantasy series. And with that book, it was kind of like the world building kind of organically grew from the story, meaning I didn't have all this like really intense world building that I had laid out at the beginning beyond the bounds of the story that I was telling. When I started the Crowns of Nyaxia series, I was like, okay, I want to seed all of this big stuff that does not necessarily affect the first book in the series at the time that I'm writing this first book, but it gives me a ton of room to sprawl out into these different directions. So I knew I wanted to do something with gods, like with gods that were very active in the story. Mostly because as a storyteller, it just lets you do so much crazy stuff, like just, oh, there's like a weird dusk plague. Yeah, someone pissed off a god over there. That's just what happens, like it lets you just break all of the rules because you can say, yeah, God did it,
Yeah.
Also, they're messy. They are messy bitches, and I love it. So the first thing I came up with was the idea of having this pantheon of 12 gods. And like in the first book, we're kind of in a pretty narrow scope. You know, we are in one kingdom, in the vampire kingdoms, in one house. But like all of those 12 gods have like entire societies of people who like worship them and their own magic systems and all of this stuff. So it's like lots of room. And then when we came to the vampire stuff, there's three different vampire houses, and all of them kind of have different magic and different gifts. And that mostly came again from me being like, what kind of vampires should I do? How about all of them? I can't decide. I'll do all of them.
Obviously, like you said, you've got these vampires in your story. What appealed to you about having vampires as your characters?
Let's see. Well, they're like I'm a weird girl at heart, you know? Like I write the fantasy romance stuff, and like I love fantasy romance or romantic fantasy or whatever. But I kind of consider myself to be like on the fantasy to romance spectrum. There are authors that are like very romance, meaning they are writing romance novels with a fantasy setting. And then there are authors that are kind of more on the fantasy side. I think I lean more towards the fantasy side. I like writing gross things. I like writing kind of dark things. And with the vampires in particular, I really loved this idea of like the power dynamics that come with being a human in that world, because a lot of times we see the reverse in those types of stories.
Of course,
like,
yeah.
There's one vampire or two vampires living in a human society. And I wanted to be able to do like some weird, gross, dark stuff. And I think as far as I didn't want to write more fae or anything. I wanted to write weird, gross, dark vampires.
Yes. I found it really interesting because you wrote in your author's note at the end of the book that you were interested in like the juxtaposition between like the human that wants to be a vampire or is sort of yearning for a part of the vampire's experience, I guess. And then you've also got the vampires who are mourning their humanity, the ones that have like turned. Could you talk a bit about that sort of juxtaposition that you're interested in?
Yeah. I mean, it's the crux of the entire story, really. Like that's when I come up with a story, the first thing I come up with is the theme. Like other than like the very most basic parts of the world, you know, like I was just discussing. Like when I'm writing like a story, the first thing I come up with is like, what is this about? Meaning it's not about, you know, a girl fighting a tournament to the death. It's about vulnerability and like, you know, wanting what you can't have. It's about humanity. So the theme of Serpent in the Wings of Night was humanity, like coming to terms with like what you are and what it does it mean to have humanity. So that was like what the first thing I came up with before I started crafting the characters of Araya and Rain. Before anything, like that was what I wanted to explore. So I always pick a theme, and then when I'm creating my two romantic leads, I kind of put them on opposite sides of the theme in some way, and then I can explore the theme like through their relationship.
Yeah, and you were just saying there about like vulnerability, but I really loved the way that you explore vulnerability with these characters. I think, like you said, it is such a big theme in your book. Is it important to you to sort of find the humanity in the fantastical?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that that's what makes any book good to me as a
Yeah.
reader. You know, I am a very much like a feelings person. Like people always will ask like, "Oh, you know, when you're coming up with a book, what's the first thing that makes you excited about it or whatever?" And for some authors, it's like, "Oh, I had this great action scene that popped into my head or this great like romantic moment or whatever." For me, it's a feeling. Like I think that the first thing that made me excited about this book, about The Serpent in the Wings of Night, was not any of the big action sequences or anything. It was like there's a scene about halfway through the book where Araya and Rain have a conversation on a rooftop about like humanity, you know? And like that was like the first, it's like a feeling. It's not even dialogue or the situation or anything, where I was like, ah, that's it. That's what this book is about.
I think one of the things that you've just made me think of there as well is that the thing about your book is that it manages to be incredibly fast paced in terms of the action sequences. There's a lot of very like chaotic fights. There's a lot going on, but at the same time, you have this like slow burning romance that just completely builds the tension. I was going completely insane waiting for something to happen between these characters. Honestly, it was like, if they don't sort it out in a minute, I'm going to lose my head. How do you manage to like strike that balance of having this like slow burn at the same time of having something so incredibly fast paced? Like, how do you strike that balance?
That is a great question, Hannah. I ask myself that every time I write a new book. And I'm like, this is it. My career is over. I'll never write a good book again.
I don't believe that.
I appreciate you. Thank you. All of my romances, I've written, I have like 8 published books out at this point, and every single one of them is a slow burn because here's what's really important to me when I'm writing romances. It is very important to me that the characters feel like they could still be together in 10 years, 15 years, 30 years. I mean, they're all freaking immortals, not immortals, but very long lived. Yeah. 500 years is a long time. Okay. Like, are they going to be sick of each other? Like it's important to me that they are friends in addition to being lovers by the end of their story.
Yeah.
I read some books that have these very, very hot, very angsty, very like sexual tension filled romances that are excellent. But I find myself being like, are they going to last 10 years? You know, like, do they actually have a friendship that's going to last that long? So all of my books end up being slow burn romances because it's so important to me. And like, even if my own investment in the relationship to like really build that foundation. And then a lot of times I actually have to go back and like add more lustiness, like add more sexual tension and more of the like the touches and stuff. Like almost always that is my feedback to myself and like other people's feedback, like beta readers when they read like the first draft where they're like, okay, like I get that they like each other, but like let's add more of the like wanting to bone stuff, you know.
There are some really sexy scenes in this book, like you write them so well. But I know that there's even a bad sex scene award, so I've been told. So I understand that they aren't the easiest things in the world to write because some people get embarrassed by that kind of thing. But how do you go about creating them, like creating those scenes?
They are, first of all, thank you so much for that, because you're right. They are very difficult to write because there are, without getting too pornographic here, I mean, it's a lot of sensation. Like in terms of like the actual things that are happening, it's a pretty limited spectrum of movement. You know what I mean? Like,
you've got to say it.
You're right. I mean, it's actually, I actually see them compared. I think that writing a good sex scene is a lot like writing a good fight scene, because similarly, they're both difficult to write because it's like a lot of sensation and a lot of like emotion, and like the actual physical things that are happening is like, oh, I stabbed a guy with a sword a bunch of times. I stabbed a girl with the sword a bunch of times, you know?
It's all like choreography in a way.
It's like choreography, but what I try to do, what makes it a lot easier for me, is I try to have every sex scene that is in a book has some kind of like a purpose in the greater story or the greater character arc. So I have like kind of an arc I can follow as for the scene as a scene, in addition to like the scene as a sex scene. So like dialogue, like my characters tend to talk a lot, you know, during or before the act, and like certain things that they're working through or whatever. So giving myself those kinds of narrative hooks to like kind of propel the scene, in addition to it just being like a sexy scene. Some authors are so good at writing sex scenes. I have never considered myself.
You're very good at writing sex scenes. I was very impressed.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I've read many a terrible sex scene, so I know a good one when I see it, and this for sure was one. And like you said, it is all about that sensation. And yeah, I think this is a very spicy book. So, but I think the tension does add to it for sure, because by the time it happens, you're like, please, like. You're like ready for it to happen. So yeah, it was really great. But I want to deep dive a little bit more into your protagonist. Do I pronounce her name Araya?
Yes.
Yes, wonderful. She is a very badass face character. I absolutely adored her. I thought she was great. And throughout the book, we get these flashbacks to her younger self. And I wanted to know, why did you want to feature her sort of younger perspective?
Because so like I said, the first thing that I come up with like the soul of a story is like that theme. And actually with all of the books in this series, in the core series, they all have those interludes where at every break of the parts you get kind of like a piece of the one of the main characters like pasts, you know. And the idea is that it finds a way to kind of like, I wanted to see more insight into that character by exploring their past, usually like around that theme. And it's also a way of kind of like foreshadowing and mirroring what's going to happen in that part of the book for the rest of that section of the book. So a few reasons. I wrote the first one and I just enjoyed writing them a lot. I actually was very close to taking them out, and I'm very glad that
Really?
yes.
Wow,
Yes.
okay.
And I write them last. Like I wrote the first one. Some of it is also just me being a self-indulgent writer. Like I love writing these kind of like omnipotent, like voice foreshadow, like artsy flashback things. I do it in a lot. If people have read all of my books, it's a thing that I do. I recognize that, but I know my strengths, okay?
Of course.
I like what I like.
Yeah, for sure. And I think those flashbacks were really great because, like you said before, that the vulnerability was a really important theme to you, and you can see that through these flashback scenes. You know, we really see why Araya is the way she is because of the things she's experienced. And you do put a trigger warning at the start of the book that she has experienced trauma in a previous relationship, and we see throughout the book this sort of lasting impact of that, and these flashbacks sort of help us understand the sort of gravity of that situation. But what did you want to sort of represent in her character by including that experience?
I think, people don't just start. I think human beings, or vampires, I guess, we're all works in progress.
Yes.
Like nothing that we do just starts at a certain point where something in our life feels like a good page one for a story, And that's why doing those flashback scenes, like doing those interludes in these books, is so appealing to me, because it helps drive home the fact that like they have all of these experiences that have happened before page one of this story that have shaped them in such a major way. That particular aspect of Araya's backstory was really interesting to me too, because like it hammers home the many gray areas in her situation and her upbringing, where like I didn't want it to be that her perspective was just like, oh, okay, all vampires just want to kill me, like they just want to because they're like evil and whatever. Like she feels like they are literally biologically incapable of not hurting her, like that is her experience. And then also like the way, without getting into like spoilery details, but the way that her father kind of forced her to deal with that situation in a way that could be read as protective, in a way that could be read as abusive, or potentially both of those things at the same time.
Yeah.
Like many things about her relationship with her father. Both of these books are about things that are two things at once.
Yeah.
And I felt like that story in her past was important for that. And I kind of wrote it for myself. I also don't like, as an author, it's tough in the dialogue of a story to just be like, let me just sit here and tell you now about this thing that happened to me a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So doing these also is like an organic way to kind of show it in the story when she's not going to just sit there and think about it in her internal monologue,
Of course. Yeah. So obviously, I mean, we have this like darker side to her history, but then we also have her relationship with, and I don't know how to pronounce his name. Is it Rain? Rian?
It is Rain.
Rain.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I didn't realize that I get some people being like, is it Ryan? And now I understand why people think that. But I'm like, oh no, Ryan is the guy who sits next to you in computer science class. Like, Rain, like the things that fall from the
Rain,
sky.
yes. But it was really interesting to see, obviously, her backstory and then to kind of watch her dynamic unfold with Rain. What was it like to write that?
It was fun.
I can imagine it was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Well, I like to use foils. Like I love to set up supporting character as various foils. Like I have the theme and I have the main character and their relationship to the theme. And then the next thing is that I have the love interest and I put them on the opposite side of that theme in a way. So I've already talked about this. Like Araya is a human who wants to be a vampire. Rain is a vampire who really mourns his humanity. So there we go. And then I pick supporting characters and I make them foils to that theme in some way. So Araya has Vincent, her father, who is part of the reason why she resents her humanity so much. So she has Rain, who represents finding acceptance and beauty in her humanity. And then she has her father, Vincent, who represents seeing her humanity as a weakness that must be excised if she's going to survive, you know?
Yeah.
So that was kind of like the main way that I would try to build on those two relationships. And it was fun. It was very fun.
It was very fun to read as well. Now, I have one more question for you before I move on to, I've had a couple of your readers have submitted questions for this, which is very lovely. But my last question is, if this book was to be adapted, what is your dream casting for Rain and Araya?
Oh, okay. You know what? I usually don't have an answer for this question, but I actually do for this one.
Yay!
Usually, I will stipulate this though, first as a disclaimer, is that I, as an author, as a creator, I believe very strongly in like a reader having their own image for characters.
Of course,
and
yeah.
so even things like pronunciations, as you've seen, I am like not super stickler about. Like
Yeah.
I put some words on a page and then I hand it to a reader to like invent in their head. So disclaimer. But these are the only characters I've ever written where from the beginning I had an image in my head. So I always imagined Jason Momoa as Rain.
Yes.
He's like a big, I see like a lot of I know some people imagine him as like kind of more pretty, but I always imagined Rain as like a kind of a burly guy. So, and then for Araya, I was going for I forget her name. Remember Jessica Jones?
Yes.
Do you know the woman I'm talking about? Kristen Ritter. There we go.
Okay, yes, I can see that.
It's like it's less her face. I mean, it is her face, but it's also like she has like the attitude. Like
Yeah.
especially when she was playing Jessica Jones, I was like, oh, she's got like that vibe for sure.
Interesting. Oh, I love this. But there's nothing in the pipeline as of yet for anything to be adapted.
Not as far as I know. I mean, call me
Well,
Hollywood.
come on, let's get the show on the road, guys. I
Well,
would
you know
like
what
to see this.
I would not turn down any adaptation, but I'm a big animation fan. And like I said, a
Yes.
lot of the inspiration for the initial seeds of this world came from when I was watching Castlevania, and I was like, this is the best thing ever. I would love an animated adaptation. I think
That
it's
would
a
be
great movie.
amazing. Yeah, for sure. I would like to see that. Oh my gosh, I'm getting very excited over something that isn't happening yet, but it needs to happen. So if
I
anybody's
would love
listening
that.
that can make this happen, please do. So
Yeah.
let's get on to your reader questions. So over on TikTok, Fantasy Girl 16 asked, "Will we ever get more from Rain and Araya again? I know future books center on different houses and characters, but I can't cope thinking I'll never be with them again." I'm pretty sure
Oh.
the second book in the are they in that?
Oh, yes. Okay. So here's how this series is structured. The main series, and there are two spinoffs that I
Okay.
won't, but the main series is 6 books, and it's divided up into 3 duologies. So books 1 and 2 are about Rain and Araya, and they take place in the House of Night. And then books 5 and 6 are about different characters and take place in the House of Shadow. And then books 5 and 6 take place in the House of Blood. But it is still 1 6-book series, like it is like you read them in order. The main plot goes across all 6 books. So book 2 is about Rain and Araya and is very much a continuation of their story.
Amazing.
In book 3, we are switching the spotlight to Misha, who is a major supporting character. Yes.
I love that.
Yeah, I love her. She's so different from Araya, like so different.
Do you plot out the fact that it's going to be 6 books before you even start writing?
Very, very loosely.
Okay.
To the point where like nothing specific. I know kind of in very general terms, like, okay, the first two books, this is how the world will change.
Okay.
Second two books, this is kind of the general direction we're headed in. And then books 5 and 6, I have some pretty clear. We're headed to some very big stuff, guys. We've got like
I'm
God Wars,
excited.
we've got all kinds of crazy, crazy shit happening. So that said, to answer, was it Fantasy Girl 16?
Yes.
Okay, to answer her question, Araya and Rain are very important people in the world and therefore are very important in the stuff that is happening through the other books, even if you're not getting their POV anymore, which even that I will not rule out. It is totally possible I might do a multi, I don't know, we'll see. But even if they're not the main spotlight, they are very, very important. And they don't turn up on screen in book 3, but they will definitely be major players in the stuff that happens subsequently.
This is so exciting. It completely blows my mind that you've already got like this whole thing plotted out. Like that's obviously you said loosely, but even that is like mind blowing to me. Um,
Oh, well, thank you.
but over on Twitter, I have VDLCL, that's the asks, how do you feel your writing has changed over the years? And what rules do you always follow when writing a new book?
Oh man, that's a great question.
Mm,
Well, I like to think I've gotten better. I've written 11 books total, I think, in my life, in my adult life. 3 of them are not available anymore. They were published and unpublished. They're not good.
right.
Um, I think that I've just like gotten to know myself and gotten to know my process better. So, but you know what? Is after 11 books, you would think that when I sit down to write a new book, I'm like, I know how to do this. No, I don't. I sit down and I'm like, oh crap, like books. What are those? How do I write that? What are words? I don't know. So I do have let's see, rules that I follow. So I've already talked about how I kind of come up with a theme. The theme of the book is the heart of the book to me. And I also I do follow like certain like plot structures, you know. There are lots of them. So for people who are familiar with like the craft of writing, things like Save the Cat will be familiar to you. Those are like types of plot structures.
Yeah.
All of them are kind of like different ways of saying the same thing, I find. And it's just a matter of finding like the one that works the best for you. So Dan Wells did a lecture that you can find on YouTube about the 7-point story structure. And it like basically changed my entire life when I read it, when I watched it, excuse me. So that for me is also like a very useful tool when I'm sitting down to write a new book, and also helping to try to like structure what the plot's going to be. And it's hard for me to say how my writing has changed. I think that just learning the craft of writing and like kind of learning what works for me has made my writing, I like to think, more efficient, I guess. But I think that I feel good about every book that I have out in the world now. You know, like I think
As
that
you
they all have,
should.
oh, thank you. Thank you. I like to think they all have different strengths, you know,
Yeah.
like I try to explore something new with every book, and none
Yeah.
of them are better or worse than others. I hope, maybe that's what I try for. But you try to do something different every time.
But it's natural, isn't it? The more that you write, the better your craft is going to get. And you know, it's a development thing. I'm an actor, and the more work that I do, the better developed I become as an actor. Like it is just the way of things. But like I said before, like I am totally new to this genre, but I completely devoured this book. I loved it so much, and I'm really, really excited to see where the series goes. This book is obviously out in paperback. The one that I've read, Serpent and the Wings of Night, is out in paperback on the 30th of May in the UK, so it'll already be out by the time this episode comes out. The sequel will be out in hardback tomorrow. And where else is it out? It's out in the US? Is it anywhere else?
Yes. So it'll be out in the US on the 4th of June. So that will be what, yesterday when this is airing?
Yes, sorry, it made it very confusing. This episode is out on the
like,
5th. Where are we?
Where are we? I don't know. I can't even the actual day that we're recording right now. Like, when is it? I don't know. Like I'm coming off of a very intense deadline, so I'm like,
Yes, I've made this very confusing for you. I'm sorry.
yeah. So it's. I mean, I think it's pretty much in English available pretty much everywhere. I want to put like an asterisk because especially with so many publishers and stuff, like
Of
sometimes I don't know.
course.
Sometimes someone will be like, "Oh, I'm in, New Zealand and it's not here right now." And I'm like, "Oh, I wasn't aware of that. I'm sorry."
Well,
But
basically, if you can get yourselves a copy, go and get your copy, and I will try and find that. I'll try and pop some links in the show notes of where people can buy this book. So we'll see.
I believe as of the week of this airing,
Yes.
in English, it will be available pretty much worldwide. So if you want
Amazing.
to go nab it, go nab it.
Love that. I'm so excited for you. Before I let you go, I like to round off the episode with a recommendation. So that can be books, TV, film, anything kind of goes for a recommendation. So yeah, have you got anything?
All right, I'll go book. My favorite book of all time. And I feel like this is like kind of a hypey book right now. So I'm, cliche recommendation. But my favorite book of all time is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller.
And I haven't read it yet.
Well, you should read it. You should read it. If that's like I mean, what I always also find comforting is that, like as an author, when you're looking at like review, I don't look at reviews. I'm very strict, never. But like when you hear about people not liking your book, because you do hear about it, regardless of whether you seek it out or not. Some people don't like my books, and that is fine. It's always comforting to me when I've had some close friends who have read this book, which is to me the best book I have ever read in my entire life, and not loved it. So it's comforting to me that like even that best book I've ever read in my entire life, it's some people's not their cup of tea.
Yeah, stuff is not to everyone's taste, but it's mind blowing when it's something that you absolutely adore and you're like, how do you not feel the same way?
I know. Yeah. So to me, it's like her prose is so good, and she just tells a story in she gives people so many feelings. I firmly believe as a creator that in a year, most readers will not really remember the actual what of what happens in your book, but they will remember how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. And that to me is a prime example because I can still remember the tears that I shed at that book. It's incredible and I love it and highly recommend it.
That's how I felt with Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. Have you read that?
I've never even heard of that. So
oh my gosh, please go and get it. I will read Song of Achilles. Please go and read Sorrow and Bliss. It is Sorrow.
Sorrow. Okay.
Sorrow and Bliss, yeah, by Meg Mason. It is a gorgeous book. It's just astonishing and I absolutely loved it. It's like contemporary fiction, literary fiction, kind of sits in that sort of genre, but it is a beautiful, beautiful book. It is just, yeah. I'm not going to say any more than that. I really think you should go read it if you've not read it. Yeah. Okay. And I hope you love it because I loved it so much. But that's how I felt about that. It was definitely a feeling thing.
Yeah. Well, it's called Sorrow and Bliss. So,
yes.
That's right
it's
on the
exactly
label.
that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm between books right now, like you said. And a lot of times, especially when I'm in kind of stressful inflection points in my own books, I can't really read romantasy because I feel it gives me like crazy imposter syndrome, which I have all the time anyway. So if this is contemporary, that's perfect for me.
Yes.
That'll be my next read.
Amazing. Oh, I love that. I hope you enjoy it. You'll have to let me know. Where can our listeners find you on social media?
All the places.
All the places. Everywhere. You're everywhere.
Yeah, I'm everywhere.
Amazing. I will link some of those in the show notes. But finally, thank you so much for coming on to A Pair of Bookends. I loved your book. Listeners, go grab yourselves a copy. And I've really loved this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful chatting with you. And thanks for listening to me ramble too much.
No, I ramble all the time, as you've probably been able to notice. For our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review and subscribe as it helps us to reach more of you. And if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. For exclusive content, you can also find us at patreon.com/A Pair of Bookends. And finally, thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.